Now, one of the reasons why I do this is because some of the scriptures from 11 to 16, there's an interesting twist on God's covenant, okay? Whenever you hear the word covenant, it's because there's a need to be saved, okay? It's representing a saving relationship. So I'm going to read verses 11 to 16 with that in mind. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. And he repeats himself again here, right? Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Thank God. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. So God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth. And so I find this to be fascinating, and I also, the next time you see a rainbow, I want you to think about this. I want you to think about the covenantal relationship that God has with not only us as individual humans, but also with all of the earth. All right, so there's an intention in this saving relationship between God and his creation. Okay, so he's establishing a covenant. Now, why would he have to do this? And again, I'm going to ask you to look at verses 2 and 3. There's a reason, and it has to do with us, because of humans, because of how we've misused or abused certain freedoms, certain things that we have at our disposal. We have caused the brokenness to be present in his creation. So just to kind of piggyback this with Romans 8:20, okay, so we have some views from the Old Testament, we have some views from the New Testament. Romans 8:20 says this, for the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. So we have a role to play in this, both for good and for evil. Now I'm going to give you a couple examples that you can, kind of wrestle with, and I'm sure you all have your own examples. But like, I've spent some time in Haiti over the years, and when I went there, you have to ask a lot of questions because it's very different than what we experience here in our society. So you'll see on the news a lot, right, that there's a lot of these, the rains and then the mudslides, right, and then you see the devastation of the villages. Do you know why that happens? Raise your hand if anyone knows why. Go ahead. Deforestation? Yeah, and right? So there's a mentality, I'll talk about this. There's a mentality of us, like, I can only live today, meaning like I'm so, the suffering is so great, right? My survival instincts are always on high alert that I can only survive today. So I don't care what happens 5 years from now. I don't care what happens 10 years from now. So I'm going to take down that tree because I need it for ore, or I need it for, whatever other uses they're going to use it for. And so when they go up to the higher grounds, they just take down all the trees. So then obviously the root system is violated, and then the water system, right? So now the water just comes piling down the hills and the mountains and then wipes out society. But because of that mentality, the brokenness of society, the fall, right? Corruption of the government, the brokenness of relationships, come back to the four echoes, and all of a sudden you watch it go from the top down, and you watch a whole society get ruined because of these things. Now think about our responsibility as stewards of the earth. Like, think about how grateful we should be for how we treat certain things that are implemented in our homeland to make sure that the trees are okay. It's not just because it's a political issue. It's actually because it's about sustaining life. When you talk about loving your neighbor, you have to consider these things. Okay, so ecology has a lot to do with how are we treating one another? How are we treating God's creation? Okay, so that was one example. And then the second one that I found in Haiti too was the fishing industry. Okay, and I like fishing, so I took an interest in it. And I didn't understand. You could actually see the color of the water change very close to the shore. And so here in America, we have regulations. You can't just take any fish you want. There has to be a size limit, right? Because why? You have to allow the fish to reproduce so that there's thousands or millions and millions of fish. Well, what they do is everyone just has that instant mentality of I need it for today, so they outfish that which they can reach from shore. So the whole ecology of the whole ecosystem gets ruined and pushes it out further and further and further. So I don't understand the whole ecosystem, but all the little bait that they eat, then the bigger bait and the bigger fish and the bigger fish, all that gets pushed out further and further and further. So now think about it. If you're impoverished, you're someone who's very, very poor, you can't afford a boat. So you can't go out and fish. You can't supply that for your family. You can't provide any longer. And so if we don't take this seriously, we continue, if you think about that as an image of pushing further out the rights of people because of the ecosystem, we are not loving our neighbor accordingly. So I just want you to be thinking about how we are stewards does matter. And it does come back to our relationship with God and one another. Okay? And then another example, I'm just trying to get you to think a little bit. You can be thinking of your own examples. I watched a show the other day, and again, I didn't research it. I don't know how true it is, but I did appreciate the research that was done on the particular episode, and it was just talking about the cattle industry, and it was talking about I think one of the big things was can you get enough proteins without meat? Okay, that was kind of like the essence of the show, and I was very intrigued by that, and I was like, oh, interesting. And so as I started listening, though, one of the things that stood out to me was like, and again, this is the part, if you know better than I do, please let us know, from a research perspective, but they said the amount of earth, right, the amount of land that is consumed by just the raising of cattle and the feeding of cattle and the raising of chickens and the feeding of chickens, right, the amount of land that it takes in and of itself, I'm sitting there going, how is this possible to sustain itself? Like just from not knowing anything about it, I'm just sitting there, oh my gosh, if this is true, how in the world can we continue to do that? There can't be enough land to continue to do this. And then they started talking about emissions. And I thought this was fascinating because everything I've ever heard is about planes, trains, and automobiles, right? And like, we should only have one car and, you try not to have too many emissions. They said because of this industry, just the cattle industry, that there's more emissions, I forget the percentage, but it was a high percentage that's caused more from that than all of the cars, trains, and automobiles combined. So I started thinking, if this is true, again, we should be mindful of this, then I should actually be thinking about different issues than what we think about. Right? Because the media will have us to think we should be focusing on the cars, and I'm nothing against that, right? Clean energy, all the nice cars that coming out, the hybrids, all that, awesome. It is important for us to kind of think about because this gets into maybe how you eat. And that'll be a whole nother discussion, right? But it's something to consider. All right, I'm getting Diane a little nervous about what I'm talking about. Don't go too far, Sean. All right, so then I haven't even talked about distribution and waste. I haven't talked about global warming. Like, think about the issues that this continues to go on and on and on. These are huge things to consider from a biblical worldview. So as stewards, we should be aware and act responsibly. See, I'm not coming down, we have a view on that. I'm saying my thing is I want you to be aware and act responsibly. Okay? I don't tell you what to do. I ask you to consider and then take action steps accordingly. And then we can wrestle with it, right? Did you choose wisely or not? And that's the community coming together to help us to get better and to grow in healthy ways. Not right and you're wrong or with judgment. So, all of this is to show our relationship to God's creation is in need of redemption. Not just humans. We need redemption through the cross, but all of God's creation does as well. And a lot of times, what's the famous verse that everyone knows? It's always on the baseball games, John 3:16. And almost all the time we read that as if it's about personal salvation. But it starts by saying, for God so loved, not individuals, the world. And the word for that is cosmos, the whole. For God so loved the whole of creation that he gave his one and only son. So you want to be mindful of that. And then the Lord's Prayer. One of the things about the Lord's Prayer is to bring heaven to earth. So when I talk about being a co-laborer, I'm asking us to say, how can you and I bring heaven to earth in all that we do?